Zimera's perspective. Periodically punctuated by my own ragged breathing, the faucet's artificial flow seemed almost to whisper to me as I stared into the mirror of my quarters bathroom. The person on the other side of the mirror looked like me, but some part of her felt unrecognizable. Why? I asked this stranger, her lips mouthing back that very same question. It was not a moral failing by which lesser civilizations wiped themselves out. It was a failing of their very evolution. Life forms outside of Tessir were forged by perpetual competition for survival. Organisms only continue to propagate by taking advantage of other organisms for their own benefit, whereas life on our home planet evolved primarily to achieve this through cooperation. Most life evolved in a more ruthless evolutionary arena. Organisms had to compete for limited resources not only with other species, but also with their own. As a sapient species becomes more advanced, so too does their capacity for self-destruction become greater. Only by cooperating with their peers can they achieve true spacefaring status. Otherwise, species simply wipe themselves out before they can get there. The great filter was not to be found in the formation of life, nor any stage of development prior to sapience. The filter was sapience itself. It was a dark, almost poetic irony that the very mechanisms which gave rise to intelligent life would ultimately lead to its extinction. Tessir was a fluke, a 1 in a trillion evolutionary curiosity. It wasn't that life on our planet never competed, but rather that it was far more prone to cooperation. As such, we were the only sapient life forms exempt from nature's tyrannical decree. We were the only ones who could advance freely without risking self-destruction. Because of this, it was our responsibility to ensure the survival of civilizations who were not so blessed by the galaxy. Without us, none of them would ultimately survive. That's what we all thought, at least. Then we discovered the human. Andrew's species achieving an interstellar age without irrigan interference was by our own understanding impossible. Desperately, I tried to dismiss the notion within my mind that perhaps our logic was flawed. Surely this was just another case of cruel chance playing out in a species' favor. Surely the odds were too slim for it to happen again. What if we were wrong about sapient species? What if by protecting intelligent life, all we did was bar it from achieving its true potential? In some ways, that stewardship test was the last straw. Perhaps it was wrong. But more than anything, I wish Andrew had failed that assessment. At least then I could dismiss his species as lacking in empathy and maintain some degree of ideological congruence. The human, however, did not do me this courtesy. He passed with flying colors. My decision to plead humanity's case before the council was unexpected even for me. I joined the Steward Corp a century ago because I wanted to protect sapient life. We saved millions upon billions of innocent people from themselves. We developed vaccines for species-ending viruses. We toppled evil governments. We destroyed poverty and hunger. I would never regret doing the right thing and helping those people. But what if there was a way to do so besides conquering them? No, I whispered, my verbal rebuke of the notion momentarily forcing it back from the forefront of my mind. We tried everything else time and time again. Non-interference was a callous non-starter. Subtle nudging could not invoke change fast enough, and vassal states inevitably rebelled as charismatic leaders turned them against us. Beneath the tumultuous cover of my own roiling thoughts, a new notion snuck into my mind, one that under any other circumstances I would immediately discard. With all the death and misery we've caused, how are we any better than this cruel galaxy? It was a hard notion to swallow. Again, I thought back to the Cynol incident. When we were forced to release that genocidal pathogen, it was a last resort, sure, but how dangerous need a species be to justify it? Could such a people even exist that would make slaughtering them a necessity? Desperately, I turned this newfound idea over within my mind, searching for a point of weakness I could use to unravel it. Try as I may, however, I could find no such flaw. Fury propelled my arm forward as I drove my fist into the mirror, fragmenting my reflection into a mosaic of myriad shards. I was furious, though with whom I could not tell. It wasn't the human, it would foolish to scorn him for tearing down the facade under which I had lived my entire life. Was it the council I was angry with for imposing our will over innocent species? Was it some form of survivor's guilt, That my species might be gifted a better nature, and yet unable to share it with the rest of the galaxy. No, I knew who I was angry with. It was not my role to judge other for their guilt. I was no judge nor jury, just a steward. The only person left for me to be angry with was myself. I fell for the illusion. I worked to suppress and control other species, never questioning why or if it had to be done. In the end, I was the one who chose to press the button. Stumbling over in a haze to my bed and diving clumsily onto it, I buried my face beneath the pillow and pondered my own guilt. If what we were doing truly was wrong, then how could I make it right? What power did I have to fix millennia of injustice? Even if I could tear it all down, would it be worth it? How many species would suffer and die without our direct intervention? At what point was it right to save them? I didn't know. I couldn't know. I was supposed to convince the human that our ways were better, that all he had to do was let go, and we would make it all better. How patronizing I had been, regarding his viewpoints like the babbling of a toddler. In the end, however, it wasn't the human who was proven wrong, and it wasn't the human who would have to make it right.
Vavi's perspective. Esteemed leaders of the Kafel, began Ulmiel, his arms and wings outstretched in a manner clearly intended to garner awe from the gathered politicians and their associates as he spoke. Truly it was a pleasure accustoming myself to each and every one of your nations, but I do believe the time approaches for you all to make your choice regarding providence. Thick silence blanked the room as the Kafel leaders tossed glances toward their contemporaries, each one waiting for another to make a move. Finally, after what must have been a minute straight of silence, President Jexal of the Emergal conglomerate cleared his throat to speak. I must say, Mr. Ulmiel, your promise of 0 allied casualties is a difficult thing to turn down. Assuming the other leaders will accept, corporate forces will not be getting in your way. A wise man, the Iragon smiled smugly, casting me the briefest side-eye as another of the leaders affirmed Jexal's position. With just a few pretty promises, already Ulmiel had half of Arkisa's leaders eating out of his hand. Tempting as the notion of an altruistic act from these aliens was, something deep down inside me knew the far uglier truth. This was all part of their plot to render us dependent upon them. Even still, their insistence that we play no role in the invasion was quite a strange one. Soon enough, the utter lack of dissenting opinions grew too much for me to bear silently. Permission to speak, Salkim? I asked, intending to do so regardless of his answer, but nevertheless deciding to at least be polite. Granted, replied the Prime Minister with a nod, a curt gesture of agreement borrowed from human body language. To be totally honest, I hadn't expected him to capitulate so rapidly to my request. I was grateful, of course, just surprised. People of the Council! I all but shouted, immediately gaining the attention of everyone involved and prompting a glare from Ulmiel as I spoke. Are you all truly happy to leave our fate in the hands of an imperialist alien empire? We have a plan already to take Providence and the technology to do so without excessive casualties. And is it not concerning to you all that they won't allow us to even observe their solution? Hearing this, a few of the council members chirped in general agreement with my words, before turning toward the Iragon expectantly for an answer to my implied question. If you all must know our reasoning, sighed Ulmiel, momentarily flashing me a smug sneer amidst his reply. We have reason to believe there are precious artifacts from the Sinal people being kept there as holy relics. We wish to retrieve them for their rightful owners. Admitting that was almost certainly a mistake on his part, as the mention of alien technology to loot quickly got everyone's attention. Allies or not, there wasn't a single nation who wouldn't want to even the playing field with Zintral by obtaining technology of their own. Case in point, Jexal immediately spoke out. I see now, he squawked, newly regarding Ulmiel with a suspicious glare. And when were you planning to tell us this before Miss Vavi spoke up? It seemed irrelevant to whether or not you would accept our help. The Iragon shrugged, his wings momentarily twitching in what I presumed to be irritation. None of us believed that, of course. Most of the people in this room were career politicians and military men. They knew well the value of keeping information in one's own corner. I believe I have heard enough, concluded Salkim, drumming his claws upon the meeting table as he addressed the Iragon. Ulmiel, we sincerely thank you for the insights you have shared with us, but I cannot in good conscience allow your empire to fight our battles for us. With that in mind, Zintril will be going ahead with our original plan." This revelation and Salkim's subsequent decision was sufficient to sway the opinions of most other council members. Nevertheless, there remained a stubborn few who insisted they would not participate in our efforts, preferring instead for their nations to nest with the Iragon. "Taking this new information into account," Jexel began, casting to the Iragon a disapproving leer, "the Emergal conglomerate will commit to assisting Zintril with their final charge. Assuming, of course, we get our fair share of the spoils." "Typical competitives," sighed Ulmiel, strutting around the table's edge before finally arriving in front of me. "We promise you the stars, and yet you are by far more concerned with petty squabbling." "No matter," he boasted, slamming his palm down onto the table in front of me with enough force to shake it from end to end. "I think you'll find the Empire is rather persuasive regarding such matters. If this Iragon was trying to intimidate me, I'm ashamed to admit that it was working." Try as I might have to steady myself, I could not keep from shaking as Ulmiel strutted out of the room. Looking down at the table in front of me, however, I was surprised to find a small slip of paper in the precise location of where Ulmiel's palm had landed. Gently plucking this mysterious message into my claws and concealing it carefully beneath the conference table, I began to read. "I must speak with you and the human. Bouth wishes to discuss our strategy. Ship will land shortly. Meet us on the landing pad." Try as I might have to interpret this enigmatic message, nevertheless, was I inevitably left with more questions than answers. Who was Bouth? What sort of strategy was going to be discussed there? Why would Andrew be helping the Iragon with anything? All of these inquiries and more assaulted my mind as I racked it relentlessly trying to figure them out. Around me, the council meeting continued, but I could hardly pay attention to it. On the one claw, I was overjoyed that the human would soon be with me once again. On the other, however, I could imagine no situation in which discussing strategy with Ulmiel could possibly be a good thing. When at last the meeting ended, I practically sprinted at full speed out onto the landing pad to watch Zimera's vessel land in our midst. When the doors slid open and Andrew stepped out, I could do nothing save for embrace him, unable to form words as he returned the gesture. Behind us, I knew the leaders of Arkisa were watching, but I no longer cared. What mattered at that moment was that the human was with us once again. Stepping out of the vessel behind the human was Zimera, her once regal posture replaced by a crestfallen gait as she gestured for the other Iragon to return with her to wherever they had come from. "Apologies, Zimera," began Ulmiel, refusing to step forth and join her aboard the spherical vessel. "Before we set off back to Aleph, I must briefly confer with the human. I trust this will not be a problem, yes?" "You are permitted," she replied, her expression blank and almost lifeless as she watched her underling shepherd us away from the leaders. When at last we were sure nobody was listening in, it was Andrew who first spoke. His tone was not pleased. "What do you want?" He growled at the Iragon before us, stepping forth so as to interpose himself between Ulmiel and I. "At ease, human. Bouth sent me." Following a brief moment of deliberation, Andrew's posture seemed to relax as he stepped halfway aside to allow the three of us to all look each other in the eyes. "All right, then," he replied, the edge in his voice reduced, though not eliminated by this revelation. "What exactly does Bouth want from me?" "The same thing as you, I imagine." Ulmiel smirked, his lower wings fluttering with some emotion I could not recognize. "He wants freedom for humanity and the Kafel." "And how the hell are we supposed to get that?" snapped Andrew, his tone underpinned with hopelessness like I'd never heard in him before. "The best I can do against them is stall for time. We've got 6 months until the council sees my failure and sends their fleets." Shocking as this admission was to me, Ulmiel seemed entirely unfazed by it. "That means we have 6 months to prepare for a fight," he replied cheerily. "A fight in which we stand absolutely zero chance." The human clapped back, furious tears forming at the edges of his eyes. "They have millions of ships. What the hell are we supposed to do against those numbers?" "There is a weapon that can take the Iragon's fleet," confessed Ulmiel, pausing as though to await some realization from the human. "Bouth told me you already read about it." "Enlighten me." Hearing this, the Iragon spy once again regarded Andrew with a pleased grin. "Tell me, human, what do you know of the vessel finality?"